Hey, how's it going, everybody? Shaun here for another movie review today. We're going to be talking about 1984's Starman. The film is directed by John Carpenter, written by Bruce A. Evans and Reynold Gideon. It stars Jeff Bridges, Karen Allen, Charles Martin Smith, Richard Jekyll, Robert Phelan, Tony Edwards, and others. The logline plot synopsis is: an alien takes the form of a young widow's husband and makes her drive him across the country. The government tries to stop them. Ooh, ooh, coming in there with the simplicity IMDb. I appreciate it. So for a long time, I kind of assumed that I had seen this. I had seen, lots of clips, lots of scenes. I even had in my mind's eye some sort of construction of what I thought the story was, or how I thought the story played out. It wasn't until last night that I realized I don't think I've ever actually watched this before, and which is kind of a unique experience. Carpenter, as if you've been watching the channel for any amount of time, Carpenter is one of my all-time favorite directors. Maybe my favorite in a certain respect, I suppose. Definitely makes the top five. In terms of movies that I've grown up with, things that I have an affinity for, the types of instincts he has, the types of kind of subtext that he deals in, it's something that I've always really enjoyed, especially, his 80s stuff. So it was kind of a cool experience to actually kind of discover something of a director that you love at this point in my life, at 34 years old, that I had never experienced before, I'd never seen before. And it's an interesting one to have never seen before. It kind of is the one, if you were to never have seen a Carpenter movie, maybe it would be the one that makes the most sense in a certain respect, because in a lot of ways, it is an anathema to the rest of his filmography. This film is earnest, soulful, hopeful about kind of the state of humanity and its ability to do good things and rise to the occasion. That's what it's kind of about in a weird kind of roundabout way. That's the subtext, and that is not typical for a Carpenter movie. He deals in cynicism with the fallout that comes from apathy, from giving over to bureaucrats, to technocracy, to authoritarianism, fascism, that kind of stuff. Those are the kinds of things he's dealing with, like the darker side of humanity. His characters, even the good guys, generally have kind of a slightly darker edge to them. But in Starman, almost everybody, except for maybe one character, like there's one kind of overt antagonistic force, one kind of overt kind of a government man who's kind of the villain. He's a little stock. He's a little rote, to be honest with you, but he serves his purpose, and he's really the one that is kind of the driving force in terms of like trying to get Jeff Bridges' character and stop Karen Allen from bringing him to Arizona. As the because that's as the description implies, this an alien crash lands on Earth. It's there to do kind of an observatory mission. Stumbles on Karen Allen's like cabin in the woods, finds some DNA of her dead husband and lover, and kind of recreates himself in his image. And there's a lot of interesting layers, especially with the relationship between Karen Allen's character and Jeff Bridges' character, in terms of her kind of her inner turmoil and her having to deal with this. This is a person that is, in a lot of ways, physically, the physiology is actually her dead husband. But the person itself is, a different being, a different personality. And part of the enjoyment of the movie is kind of the development of that relationship. I suppose you could even say romance, and how they learn to kind of get along and help each other, and how he convinces her that he just wants to go home, that he's not here to hurt anybody. That was never his purpose at all. And it was just kind of curious aliens, because the movie starts with like a one of these, like a pod drifting out into space with a message of greetings, and to whoever might find it out there in the universe. Somebody finds it, and they come back to Earth to see who it's from. But yeah, in the movies, it's an interesting one for Carpenter, and not just the ways of like the subject matter, but in the way that he films it. And in some ways, it feels like one of his more cinematic efforts in a more traditional sense. There is a lot of Spielbergian feeling to the movie. This is from 1984. This is kind of the heyday of Amblin Amblin's coming into its own during the same time period, and it has that kind of sense to it, you know? If you weren't to know better, you might even confuse this with a Spielberg movie just because of how much it embraces kind of the cheesiness of the scenarios and the schmaltziness of it, and just the overt sense of optimism and earnestness that the characters kind of imbue. There's lots of other cool things in the movie. One of the things, you know, that got a lot of notoriety even at the time is Jeff Bridges, his performance as Starman. He was nominated for an Academy Award. I think it's the only Carpenter film that's ever been nominated for an Academy Award, which is kind of crazy considering, you know, like how much technical wizardry went into a lot of the movies that he made in the 80s. You know, something even like Big Trouble in Little China. Like, you could see that getting kind of like a production design nomination or something like that, but I guess not. I was honestly kind of shocked to see that. It's not something I'd ever looked into. I never looked in to see if Carpenter had been nominated for anything, or if any of his movies just in general. I mean, even the music. Like, how does something like the Thing, you know, Morricone's score not get a nod? You know? Kind of weird. Especially considering that Morricone ends up winning at least the Golden Globe. I don't know if he won an Academy Award, but he won a Golden Globe for The Hateful Eight. For his score of The Hateful Eight, which, if you don't know, is repurposed B-sides from the score of The Thing. So there you go. But yeah, Jeff Bridges gives a really phenomenal performance, and a really odd, kind of brave performance in a way. Like, he really goes for it. He really goes for this unique, idiosyncratic, eccentric kind of alien character. He apparently like paid attention to the way that birds move. He just figured, you know, kind of taking the script and the story very literally, like if a body were, or if an alien were to take over somebody's body, like they wouldn't know how a person acts or how they move, you know, their facial expressions. Like, you know, he constantly will have to mismatch like dialogue with the way he is, his physicality, his body language. Oftentimes they don't actually like, they don't level out to be the same thing, which is, you know, it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of thought to do that, because it's almost like kind of like trying to pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time type deal. And I thought he did a really great job. It's a fun performance, and he kind of, I think, more than almost anybody, understood some of the tone of the movie that maybe wasn't like obvious or apparent to all of the actors. Karen Allen is also really good. She gives a really kind of quiet, nuanced, subtle performance. It's very like earnest. It's you know, it's the movie's like, you know, it's kind of a short movie. Well, actually, no. Well, it's 2 hours. It's about little under 2 hours long. And she is able to kind of pack in a believable arc over that 2 hours. You do, in a sense, kind of feel like she's kind of the audience avatar, and she's being convinced of this kind of new reality that she's facing. And I think in terms of like you understanding where she's coming from, I think she does a lot with actually very little. She's not this movie is not overwritten. It's very straightforward. Almost shockingly so. Like, you could say like, oh, you would expect some twists and turns or some extra complications, but not really. Like, the complications that the movie brings up are way more kind of about emotional investment and that side of the story. It's really not the plot. The plot is very straightforward. It kind of ends exactly the way you think it will end as well. I mean, maybe because I knew this from a little bit from osmosis. I just thought it was just a different movie. I don't know why. I just had a way different expectation for what this movie was going to feel like. I didn't expect it to be so nice. It's like a very sweet movie. You feel like really good about what you just watched. You're like, oh, wow, that was really nice. I think that was even a direct quote. I was like, oh, that was a really sweet movie. Like, sweet, not like sweet in the colloquial sense, but in the literal sense. You're just like, wow, this is a really kind-hearted film, surprisingly enough. And it's like, like I said, starting out, like, this is the odd duck out in his filmography. And even Carpenter thinks so. Like, he knows it too. On the Blu-ray here, there's really only one special feature, and it's like making of Starman, or remembering Starman. It's like a 20-minute long little cut together a bunch of interviews with like Jeff Bridges and a few of the other actors, I think maybe even some of the crew, and Carpenter himself. And Carpenter, there's a line in the movie where somebody says, like, you are at your best when things are worst. That's what Starman has come to understand and appreciate and respect about humanity. That's what he's learned on his observation mission. Is that human beings will rise to the occasion when the chips are down and kind of come together. Carpenter quoted that in his interview, and he's just like, I don't think that. I don't believe that. He's like, but that's the movie we were making, and I thought it was appropriate for the movie, but he was like, I don't believe that. And I guess, just going back to the script itself, apparently it was a very well-respected script in town. It was a very tight script as well. All of the actors, which I suppose, what are the actors going to say negative about it? But they were like, it was just really good. You could see what the movie was supposed to be on the page. And there's no mistaking what kind of film that they were trying to make. Obviously you don't know what the kind of the tone is, or if it's going to be darker or lighter or whatnot, but I guess the purpose and the thesis of the movie was very clear from just the script level. So it attracted a lot of talent, and Carpenter had to kind of fight for some of his choices. Like even Jeff Bridges, like he had a few other people in mind. I can't remember exactly who it was, but as soon as he met up with Bridges, it just clicked, and he was like, no, that's the guy. And he kind of had to fight a little bit to get Bridges cast. Which is kind of a weird thing because Bridges, his star was on the rise at this time, So, but that's what he said. I don't know. And some of the stuff, another thing I really appreciated about this movie, I really liked about this movie was the cinematography. It is a really good looking movie and a really unique, another example of kind of being unique in his filmography. Donald M. Morgan. What else did Donald M. Morgan do? He worked on Seven, Under Siege 2. He also worked on Christine, which actually kind of makes sense now that I'm thinking about it. Christine and Starman, there is kind of a parody to the way that they look, actually. There's just the soft focus, kind of day glow kind of edge to the movie where it feels idyllic in a cinematically idyllic in the way that Spielberg tries to create. So because that's when I was watching this Starman, I was just like, it feels just so much like I hate to say knockoff, but like a Spielberg knockoff. Not necessarily in a bad way, because I think Carpenter achieves his goals. I think he gets it done, but it is kind of that Amblin in-house look to it. And some of just the patience that Carpenter has in the way that some of the scenes play out, and just kind of letting the natural beauty of the countryside that they're traveling through, because a lot of the movie takes place in cars and diners and truck stops, and he kind of really captures kind of this I guess this Americana sense to it. Not always in a good way. Sometimes that ends up being kind of a negative thing, but in terms of just the natural beauty of the world, I think he captures it really well. And it also kind of mirrors the experience of Starman himself, because you're experiencing his observational mission and the way that he's seeing things and the good things that happen and the bad things that happen on the road. And I think Carpenter does a magnificent job with that. There's a great scene where Starman is leaves this diner and he goes out to this dead deer on the roof of a hunter's car and brings it back to life. And the way it's shot is just really kind of almost fairy tale like. The movie has kind of a slight fairy tale quality to it. It borders on contrived. It could sink into that territory, but I feel like Carpenter's style just grounds it enough where it never feels overly cheesy or schmaltzy. I think he just kind of hits it right perfect. I know for a fact, I've listened to so many Carpenter interviews over the years. It is one that he will cite as being one of his favorite movies that he directed. Which is interesting, if you just think about his filmography. That's a kind of an interesting statement, Apparently, that's the other person. The other person that he was in consideration for Starman was a young Tom Cruise. Yeah. But Tom Cruise was making Legend at the time, so he couldn't get away to make Starman, which would be interesting. It'd be a much different movie, and honestly, I think Cruise probably would not have been good for it at that point in his career. Just too much of the boyishness. Jeff Bridges is like a man, for lack of a better way to put it. You know, he reads that way on screen. And also, Jeff Bridges has like a soulfulness to him, no matter what character he plays. That's kind of part of his magic as an actor, in my opinion. That's why he's like a movie star. You know, you just like Jeff Bridges. He's enigmatic. Like he draws your attention. You want to watch Jeff Bridges give a performance, even if you're kind of in a meta sense aware of the performance. Like you're not asking Jeff Bridges to disappear into a character. You know, in the same way, like you're not asking like Daniel Day-Lewis to disappear into the character. Like you just like what they bring to a performance, like a capital P performance. And I think in that sense, I think it's good that Jeff Bridges was cast over Tom Cruise, because that would have been crazy. Also, Kevin Bacon. I think he was offered the role. Again, I like Kevin Bacon, but I feel like just like the vibe he would have had in 1984, he would have been just way too young. There's something about like I think you needed to have characters that were a little bit older. You know, the only other person I could think of maybe that could have done something interesting with it, I don't know if it would have worked out. Maybe like Harrison Ford, which would have been nice because of Karen Allen, bring him back. You know, because Karen Allen's, Marion from Raiders of the Lost Ark and what? Temple of the Skull. The Crystal Skull. Is that what it is? Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls? Yeah, that's what it's called. Something like that. The fourth Indiana Jones one, the one that people often dismiss. But yeah, I think he could have done something maybe interesting. I feel like he probably, but I don't think he's not the kind of actor that's going to go for it in the same way that Jeff Bridges did. Like Jeff Bridges really like put himself out on a limb to do this, because this it could have come off like awfully. And you really got to trust your director, and you really got to trust your instincts to kind of go down that road, because you could just see that like almost being like a simple Jack type thing. If you're familiar with the movie Tropic Thunder, like it totally could be very easily gone into that territory. But he just, between his performance, Carpenter's direction, and the way it was edited, I think they end up being pretty okay. They end up hitting the right tone. The score is by Jack Nitzsche. He did a lot of scores. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, An Officer and a Gentleman. A little bit on, I guess, Moulin Rouge, apparently. Most recently, he's been sampled. He passed away in 2000. But what would be the last thing he did? There's my phone. Did some of The Simpsons and Living Color. I guess he kind of just ended up doing uncredited songs of Mystery Science Theater 3000 in the mid-90s. Oh, wow. Well, he gives a good score. I like the score here. It's very like E.T.-ish. Like I said, it definitely tries to go for that kind of classically nice cinema that something like Spielberg would make in the 80s. And I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily, you know? It comes close to feeling like a ripoff, or a knockoff, I suppose. Rip-off's not the right way to put it, but a knockoff of the Amblin style. But I think Carpenter is different enough and grounded enough, really. You know, that's kind of, if Carpenter's good at something, is that he can take kind of these fantastical concepts and kind of really bring you back down to earth, no pun intended, with how they feel. They just feel tangible. They feel gritty. There's something about them that just like, it's just different. It doesn't feel fantastical in the same way that something like a Spielberg thing does. Like, when I think of Spielberg, like I think of like movies from like the 40s. I think of like Casablanca, things like that. Like that's the kind of filmmaker. He's like this idyllic filmmaker. He's his points of reference and the things that he's pulling from are much more classic cinema. Whereas somebody like Carpenter, well, he's pulling from like John Ford and Howard Hawks. In terms of pacing and rhythm and stuff like that, he doesn't copy it in the same way. Or maybe he just couldn't. I don't know. It just wasn't in him to do it, Because even, the best of Carpenter's stuff, the thing that is great about Carpenter, in my opinion, is how he kind of is like, he's a very workmanlike director, and how he facilitates the stories that the types of stories that he told, how he facilitates it from like a craft perspective by hiring really great people. I mean, that's why like some of the best Carpenter stuff are the ones that are shot by like Dean Cundey, like The Thing or Escape from New York. It gives those movies such a special juice, and it's something that unfortunately, and even as big of a fan of Carpenter as I am, it is something that it did not last his whole career. He got with that fucking cinematographer who is not a bad cinematographer by any stretch of the imagination, but he's also just kind of flat. He's not like Dean Cundey creates like a painting, like, and he uses every element on the set to facilitate that. Yeah, Gary B. Kibb, who passed away in 2020. Rest in peace, Gary. Don't mean to besmirch you, but I mean, he shot a bunch of like, the stuff that we all love, the Carpenter stuff, Big Trouble in Little China, They Live, RoboCop 3. Oh, he shot The Crow, A City of Angels. Oh, director of photography and additional photography. Well, that's interesting. If you'd like to watch The Crow, City of Angels with me, that's here on this YouTube channel. You can watch. I watched the whole thing. I watched the Second Coming fan edit of it. So if you want to check that out, you want to check out some of the work of Gary Kibb, which is interesting because I don't think I realized that when I watched the movie that it was him that did it. But that movie's got a kind of a cool look to it. If I could say anything positive about that movie, it's probably the cinematography. He also he shot additional photography on Alien 3, which is curious. It's interesting because that's actually looks a lot like The Crow. What else did he do? He did Second Unit on Misery. He did some work on Stand By Me, Camera Operator, Head Office, Fletch. He did Fletch. There's just something about him. Like, he's not a bad cinematographer. I don't mean to suggest that he is, but there's a flatness to his stuff that I think works to a detriment to Carpenter's kind of aesthetic, I guess. I don't know. I mean, put The Thing visually against They Live. And I love They Live, but they're not even on the same planet, everybody. Ha ha ha. All right, well, I'm really glad I got around to watching Starman. I thought I had seen it before. I'm super stoked. I liked it quite a bit. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Carpenter movie. It didn't blow my mind to that capacity, but I really had a good time. Like, I really enjoyed it. It was, like I said, a very sweet, earnest, sentimental movie about an alien that just wants to learn a little bit about us and then go the fuck home. And it's got some nice, it has some, I guess it does have one plot twist. That maybe, I don't know how people are going to feel about it today in this day and age, but back in the 80s, they were like, isn't that the sweetest thing ever? Isn't that sweet, this gift he gave to Karen Allen when he kind of sort of asked? I'm not going to spoil it for you. You check out the movie. You might know what it is. If you know what it is, write it in the comments. Do you think the train scene, the conversation they have after the coitus, do you think that would hold up to the mores of modern time? Are they going to try to cancel Starman next? Am I sitting on a gold mine here? I even got the slipcover, baby. Oh, I love doing this with the slipcovers. See, if I get the Scream Factory or Shout Factory ones, I do the new art, and then I flip it around. They're gracious enough to give you the old art. And I do that, and I get to have this awesome experience that only I enjoy and only I know about. I see it on the shelf, and I know. I'm like, oh, under that slipcover, that's the original art. Ooh, pretty cool. All right, everybody, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to know more about Zoobox, there's a bunch of links in the description for Facebook, for Instagram, for my Twitter, my brother's Dan Twitter, also for our Twitch channel and our DLive channel, which is DLive is basically where we're doing a lot of our live streaming right now until further notice, until at least May. We're not going to get our streaming privileges back until I think, mid-May or early May. Sometime in May we get it back. So that's what we're doing over there, but we put all the archives up on YouTube so you can check them out after the fact. But if you'd like to be part of the live show, go check out DLive. It's an interesting place. Not as spicy as some people say. There's like 2 spicy things on there. It's mostly just people playing video games and being just as boring as everybody else on Twitch. Because it's kind of like a Twitch Lite thing. But anyways, you guys have the best one ever. I'll talk to you later. about something else. Goodbye.